Almost done. Almost done. Almost done. Okay. So, we have the 7th and second to last episode of Percy Jackson and the Olympians. We find out the truth, sort of. Now, you know what, let's just get into it, because usually I try to start with the thing that pissed me off the most. And you know what, I think I will start off with that like I usually do, and in this episode, it's Hades. Hades is just all kinds of wrong in this episode. In the novel, and because in this show they do actually adapt that his helm is missing, and that he thinks Percy has it, and that's what he wants. He gives him the helm, he gives him his mother. Still with me? Alright, but the problem is Hades' personality. In the novel, he's an angry, he's just completely pissed that his helm is missing, and he's a no-nonsense motherfucker. He's not going to make a ton of jokes or stupid comments. He's down to business, and he is absolutely pissed. Here they make him Gru from Despicable Me. They try to make him, like, charismatic and everything, and having a bunch of stupid jokes and everything, and it reminds me a lot of Last Jedi when they tried to force jokes in to try to copy the Marvel movies, and it seems like that's what they're doing here. And I don't understand this decision. And not to mention that, for reasons I'll get into later, Annabeth is not with them during the meeting with Hades. And once again, just like every other episode, they figure things out off of nothing. Like, they just already know what's going on. And that happens in the very first scene, which is Krusty's waterbed palace. Now, I was hoping they wouldn't shove this scene into the show, but I will give it some credit that they gave it a reason to exist. I still don't think they needed it at all, but we'll get to that in a second. So he walks into Krusty's waterbed palace, and he's, of course, like, being the businessman. He's trying to sell stuff, and then he sees that it's a 12-year-old walking in. Percy's first line in this episode is, "I know who you are." Because of fucking course he does. You know, in the novel, after they have already been captured by Annabeth and Grover have been captured by the waterbeds and everything, Percy doesn't even figure out who he is. Krusty tells him who he is. But instead, in this show, Percy immediately says, "I know who you are, you're Procrustes, and what you do with your waterbeds, how you lure people in to kill them." He explains everything to this guy that he already knows. This is something that Riordan is clearly and it's something a lot of novice writers don't understand how to do, and that's exposition. Now, I've had this problem with the show since episode 1, is that the exposition, it's just people talking and talking and talking and talking. But the worst kind of exposition, even if they don't have the line in it, it's what's known as you know, which basically means telling somebody something they already know. Now, he obviously doesn't use the phrase, "as you know," but he's explaining this guy's motivations instead of him doing it. What was the point of this? I don't know. And Percy doesn't even defeat him. Annabeth does. Because we can't have Percy do anything smart in this show. We can't have him outsmart Procrusty and trick him into being captured by his own waterbed. No, Annabeth just pushes him onto it while invisible. So the shop is the path to the underworld in this episode, and again, I will give it credit that it tries to give this scene a purpose, because I was so glad they cut this out of the movie, but this also shows that you still didn't need this. You could have just done what you did in the book, because they don't meet Charon until they're already in the underworld. Like, they've been in there for several minutes before they meet Charon, instead of him, like, being the first person they meet in the underworld, which again, the movie did as well. And it seems like nobody's really concerned with the bolt. When they're about to go into the underworld, they don't say, "Let's go get the bolt to prevent this war." She says, Annabeth says, "Let's go get your mom." Yeah, because fuck the war, I guess. And that comes back in a little bit. So, we get a ton of pointless flashbacks in this one. Now, we've had a couple flashbacks already. We had one in episode 1, and we had one in, I think, episode 4, I want to say. And they were both pretty pointless, but they weren't too distracting. This time, there are a ton of them. There's at least 4, and only one of them is even worth watching, and it's the one where Sally meets Poseidon. But again, you didn't need this. And again, it's just more generic dialogue that you've heard in every other movie and TV show, and I'll get back to that in a second, because that happens at the tail end of the episode. So, something else that's weird about this show is that even though the budget is massive of $15 million per episode, which, by the way, is the same budget as Season 8 of Game of Thrones. And yet the CGI is atrocious. All the green screens look bad. The underworld looks lame as fuck, too. It's just a bunch of gray clouds, dark rocks, dark woods, and a fucking desert with a sarlacc pit in the middle. I know that's the pit to Tartarus. I don't need anybody telling me that, but it just looks like a big-ass sarlacc. Or hell, it looks like Charybdis from Sea of Monsters. But something else that I've been noticing since episode 2 with the visual effects, is that every time, except for the Minotaur fight, where it looked lame as hell, anytime Percy uncaps the sword, it's always off screen. Now, this is how they always do it. So, and ironically, in the movies, which again had a budget of $95 million, and this show had an accumulative budget of $120 million, once you add up all the episodes. Okay, so this is how they do it. Okay, so here's the pen, right? What he'll do, like he does when Cerberus attacks, he pulls out the pen, you see the pen very briefly, he pulls it off screen to uncap it, and then the sword blade just appears. Yeah, this is a wooden sword I got when I was 6 years old, and it's still a proper size for a sword than the Hobbit's dagger that Percy uses in the show. But that is how they do it. I'm not even convinced he has the pen in most scenes, that they just told Scobell to just hold up the sword after a couple seconds, like he does at the tail end when Ares appears. It's just shink, shing, there's the sword. That's how it appears every time in this show, because they're so scared of the visual effects, because they all look awful. And again, this has the same budget as the last season of Game of fucking Thrones, which has better CGI than most movies nowadays, so there's no excuse for the bad CGI. If this was maybe a $5 million per episode, or I'd be way more forgiving if this was like a Flash, where it was like $1.5 million per episode, I'd understand it a bit more. But this is $15 million per episode. It's not like they have any A-listers. It's not like they had to sink that money into big-name actors. Hell, the movie had big-name actors and still had fantastic CGI, and that probably used about half the budget. But yeah, I mentioned Cerberus. Door started creaking. I mentioned Cerberus. Grover gets briefly eaten by Cerberus just for Annabeth to have it vomit him up 30 seconds later, so hooray for pointless tension. And this is going to piss off a lot of book and TV show fans when I say this, but it reminded me a lot of when Grover got swallowed by Kronos in Sea of Monsters. But at least in that movie, it was there to show how dire the situation is. Here, he gets swallowed for about 30 seconds, it's barely acknowledged, and then he just gets thrown up again. It's almost used for comedy when he gets thrown back up, and also this is just used so that he loses the pearl. Yeah. So you remember how I mentioned that in the last episode Percy got 4 pearls? Yeah, I figured that it was just going to be someone loses a pearl in the underworld. That's exactly what happens. Halfway through the episode, he gives one to Annabeth, gives one to Grover, and then Grover loses it and it gets swallowed by the dog. So, I ask again, what was the point of the 4th pearl? You could have, because now we have the dilemma of there are 3 pearls and 4 people, so who's going to stay behind? The book and movie certainly didn't have that, right? Oh, wait. And actually, it worked a lot better there, because they only then realized, oh shit, we only have 3 pearls, what are we going to do? Here, it's because Pearl got swallowed by a 3-headed dog. Again, there was no point to this change, but people are still gonna ride Riordan's cock and tell us that, oh no, this was a great change because it adds to the characters. No, it doesn't. Especially doesn't help that these characters have no fucking character. And then they go through some generic-ass woods, I guess. I don't even remember what this is supposed to be. Annabeth gets, like, stuck on a root or something, and she has to use the pearl to get out. And Percy doesn't think to draw his sword to try to cut her free. I mean, even if it doesn't work, you could at least try, you dick. Annabeth doesn't try to use her knife to cut herself out. Percy doesn't try to use Riptide. Nothing. They just leave her there. So it's just Percy and Grover for the second half of the episode until they get back to Santa Monica, where she's waiting for them. Grover starts obviously getting pulled to the pits of Tartarus. And by the way, this episode is the first time he's used the shoes since the Medusa battle. Yeah, you remember how he used it at the water park, which shows he's using them and uses them constantly? This is the first time he's used them since the Medusa episode, and need I remind you, he barely used them in the Medusa episode? It wasn't him actually fighting Medusa with simply his sense of smell. It was him flying around, and it was a joke of, haha, kid can't fly, and then crashes into a box. Yeah, he uses them here just to get swallowed by the dog, and then to get pulled to Tartarus. removing Grover from the water park scene just completely defeated the purpose of these shoes if just to set up for this lame plot point, because you forget Grover even has the shoes. Honestly, last 2 episodes, I forgot he had them. Even though I've read the book countless times, I forgot he had them. And also, Percy's kind of a dick in this scene because they, get up to because it's just sand dunes here. And when he sees the pit of Tartarus, not only doesn't, keep running after Grover like he and Annabeth does, he stops and stares at the pit while his friend is being dragged towards the giant pit that leads to Tartarus. What an asshole. And then, in the book, it's referenced that, because how much they had to run to keep up with Grover, that he's exhausted, that his backpack feels a lot heavier. That part was actually well written in the book, because it's like, oh yeah, he's like, oh, my backpack just feels heavier because of how exhausted I am. But that was a subtle hint that the bolt was now in his backpack. Here, they hear the bolt appear in the bag, and he immediately pulls it out, and it's like, oh, Ares stole the bolt. So that defeats any tension for the rest of the episode, where we're supposed to think Hades stole it, until Hades knows it's in the backpack, and he finally pulls it out. Hell, again, that's something the movie got right. When they are face-to-face with Hades, they find out that Percy drops his shield, and the bolt, and Hades notices the bolt, starting to spark out of the handle. So again, the movie's getting more right than the TV show here, and people still want to tell me this is accurate and bitch about how the movies are so inaccurate. So, yeah, moving on. And then I've already talked about Hades' character, and all the green screens, especially in this scene, look fucking atrocious. They're laughably bad. And then we're not done with people figuring out shit based on nothing, is that Percy immediately figures out that Kronos is the one who stole the bolt. He's not supposed to know that Kronos aided in stealing the bolt. I don't even know, did he do it during the Ares fight, or did he not figure out until I don't even think he figured it out until he faces Luke at the end of the book in the final chapter. But here he figures it out just while Hades is rambling about why would I want to steal the bolt and everything. He's immediately figures out, oh, it's Kronos. Again, tension be fucked, apparently. We can't just think that Ares is the one who stole the bolt, like in the novel. No, we gotta immediately figure out who the villain of this show is. And again, I figured that those dream sequences where he's walking around in a random desert with a fucking hood on looking like Darth Maul in the Twin Sons episode of Star Wars Rebels, I figured it was Kronos first time he showed up, and lo and behold, I was fucking right. And then, even though it was teased in the trailer for this episode, Ares fight ain't here. No, I'm serious. The end of the episode, it's Poseidon talking to Sally. It's basically a voiceover the entire time, saying just generic stuff. And then Ares and Percy and Grover meet up with Annabeth there. And then Ares just strolls in with the sword on his shoulder, just walks in like this. No dialogue, no tension whatsoever. He just appears out of nowhere and just walks, and it's not like he teleports there or anything. He's just there, walking towards them with a sword that, again, looks like a Party City prop. Percy draws his sword, and then it cuts. Oh, by the way, they're still not done with the cuts to black. They still don't know how fucking transitions work in this show. So it looks like the last, and that honestly kind of annoyed me because I saw this episode, oh, it's 41 minutes, we'll get the Underworld and the Ares fight, so that means there won't be any time for needless bullshit. But there was time for needless bullshit. Again, the scene where Annabeth gets, caught in these woods, you could have cut that. Had her with them, and then had the fight, and then saved those few minutes for the fight with Ares. You would have missed nothing. But no, we're not done with pointless padding. I'm so sick of this goddamn show, and thank God we only have 1 episode left. Oh, and by the way, yeah, I ran the numbers on this show, and I have it in the comment on the last video, is that this show got roughly 7 million views for its first week, when people were claiming at 30 million. 7 million barely outpaces She-Hulk's first week, which had 5.8. And need I remind you that She-Hulk was a catastrophic failure. Yeah, this was not the success that Disney and its fans are making it out to be. So that's all I got for this episode, and I'll see you next time. Bye.